It's Anna. Welcome to part 2 of this project. I am going to be showing you guys my selection of materials, how I got my measurements, and how I got my first pattern draft. What you're looking at here is basically the result of that work. So on to Anna of the past, where she tells you what she's going to do. So after raiding my stash and a visit to my favorite little local fabric store, this is what we have. And I kind of want to go over what we picked. In part 1, we discussed color. And this is the red I chose for kit. It is kind of a faded red. I was looking and researching the color that are obtained through madder dyes. And it tends toward a very deep, almost terracotta red. So this has a little bit of pink in an undertone in real life in certain light. So I think this is a good option for that look. And then for cat, for cat we chose this deep yellow. And the material I chose is a linen blend. It's actually 65% or 85% viscose and then linen. So it has the same look as a plain weave linen, but it's much softer, much thinner, and I think I'm gonna like the drape. I think that'll work in scale, because we will be cutting on the grain of the fabric with some of the gores being on the bias, but most of this will be straight grain, so it's not going to have a lot of stretch or the same drape that a bias would. So I think this is going to work really well for the kirtles or the outer dress. And I've got my matching thread. For the shift underneath, I have a couple of options, so I'm going to see which works best. I had mentioned before about choosing a light French gray, and this looks a lot grayer in the light today because it is kind of overcast today, but it's a very muted light French gray, probably about 20% gray. I have this, which is actually a rayon. It's still a plain weave fabric. Rayons are usually used in place of silks. This one has almost like little tiny slubs, which I think will work in scale to mimic the look of a finer linen than the outer dress. And it's fairly thin and should drape well for that simple garment. If I find this is too dark or too stiff, I do have a cotton voile. This is a very thin cotton. Let me show you if I can split this so it's not folded double. It is much thinner, but it does have a much smoother appearance, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to look. Granted, at this time, the only one that you're really going to see this layer is for Cat, because she will have the shorter sleeves. So you will see her sleeves, and you may see a little bit more at the neckline, but you won't see much of it. So if this does not work for the shift underneath, I will be using it for the apron over top. I think that would be a good color choice, because aprons kind of took place of your kitchen towels. So it needs to be something that would have been very durable, very, well, I hate to say expendable. So an unbleached linen would have been appropriate for that piece of clothing. And I want to do some embroidery on it. So I picked out some threads. I think just in case, Kat has some options for embroidery as well. And these are actually some hand-dyed cotton embroidery floss that I have had in my stash for quite a while. I haven't actually been doing a lot of cross stitch since we got the dolls, and I kind of miss it. Embroidery for me is a very relaxing hobby. So I have each of these is like variations of color. They're not any one, you know, shades. Just you've got some darkers, some lighters, and they are hand dyed, which I think is nice to kind of play into that historic thing. So these are not aniline dyes. They're not extremely bright colors. They are, again, more muted, more natural colors. So I think that'll work really well on that piece of embroidery on the apron. And now at this time, they would decorate the collars and sometimes the sleeves of items with braid or trims, and I found some of this in my stash. This is an embroidered and woven ribbon trim. It's not exactly period. There's no metallic in it, but again, it's kind of just paying homage to that idea. I think it's a good width. I don't think they will be distracting. I think the muted colors will work well with the fabrics I have chosen. But it'll be kind of fun to have some of that really tiny detail, especially on Kat's sleeve bands, on her arms, and on the neckline of the piece. So I think that'll be nice. For cording, I actually have this velvet. It's meant for cross stitch, but it's just a very, very narrow velvet cording, and I think that'll work. If I were making this full scale, I would probably be creating basically almost like a crocheted cord for the spiral lacing, but I think this will work nice in place of it, and it will reduce some labor so I can spend more time on the details like the embroidery. There are no buttons, there's no zippers, there's no metal eyelets, because all of that will be eyelets sewn by hand with the spiral lacing. The shift doesn't have any fasteners other than sometimes they would put a brooch to close the collar. So basically thread and needles is what I need to construct. At the end, I did end up buying some cream. It's a very, very light cream colored linen, the same as the dress, to make the veil and cap from. So, but it is much stiffer, so I may try washing this. This one does not have as much viscose as the other ones do. This one has more linen in the blend, so it is stiffer, and as you can see, it has more of the slubs. So I'm gonna try washing a patch of this to see if it does shrink the weave down, if removing any sizing or finishing makes it softer, just to see if that will work for the veil or the head covering. And that's what we've got to work with. This will be fun. Hi guys. Excuse kind of the bad lighting because I wanted you to be able to see her more than me. We are getting into part 2 of my project, and part of that is taking her measurements so that we can draft our pattern. And I actually have a little chart here of the measurements I need to take so that I can draft my pattern. And I'm going to do a little bit of a different way of doing it today. If you have followed us on social media, you know that a few years ago I actually made a sloper for my dolls. Now, slopers traditionally use darts and things like that to create the shape of the garment, but in this case, with this medieval shift that I need to make, and then the overdress or kirtle, they didn't do it that way. It's a little bit kind of low tech. So they wouldn't have had a fiberglass measuring tape, and for the vast majority of time back then, we didn't have standardized measurements. So everything was very much based on the person that the item was being made for, because it was made to fit that person and that person only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to use this string, this blue string, and I hope it shows up on the camera. I'm gonna kind of come in so you can see over my shoulder, and we're gonna use this to figure out how long the sleeves need to be, how long the dress, the main part of the dress, needs to be, her bust, her waist, her hips, and figure out our dimensions based on that. Now, rather than tying knots in the string that might shorten or lengthen it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how much string I need. I'm going to trim the string, and then I am going to transfer that to my ruler for a standard measurement that I can put on here, so that when I'm drawing the lines for my pattern, you guys will actually be able to have a pattern that you can use and to then recreate your own. So it's kind of an amalgamation of different methods, but I think this will be fun. I think it'll be fun to show you how you measure a body for something, so you can try it yourself. And here we have the results of all the measurements, all those little pieces of string and what they amounted to. Never done this before, but I'm going to attempt to show you how I draft my patterns. I'm just going to kind of do a scale model here. I have my graph paper, and I'm just going to do a 1:1. So 1 square equals 1 centimeter here. And I wrote this and I annotated it right there at the bottom here. And what I need to do is I need to put in the full length. So we had 40 centimeters for the skirt, to start here and I'm going to make a dot. And I know that this grass paper, it's 5 small squares per large grid line. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. So that's going to be my skirt. And I know that I need an additional 12. So I'm going to have to extend this out just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this with that 40 centimeter line. Okay. And we will continue up from there. Okay. So I said I needed an additional 12 centimeters to the nape of the neck. So 5, 10, 12 is the top of my pattern. And I'm going to come out and I'm going to split across the front of her bust, which was 16. So I'm going to do 8. So 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the initial draft of the pattern after plotting it out on my graph paper. The red lines are the differences between the first draft and second draft. Kind of show you where we had to make adjustments and add the seam allowance. I have made my basic pattern pieces for the shift. I decided to go ahead and do the shift first because that one, the fit is not as critical as the outer gown, and I'm making this from a very thin cotton. It's a cotton lawn, not voile, and we have the piece for the back. This is the narrower piece, and that is going to be closed in the back, but I did include so I can fit in one of these gores. And then we have our front piece, which is wider because she's wider across the front. We've got our sleeve gore, that's that piece in the underarm that allows for extra movement, and then these very wide side gores to fit into the sides. Here are all of my first draft and changes that became the second draft. And then the blue marks are where we made additional changes after checking the fit.